Hello. So my name's Megan Lautz. I am a registered dietitian that specializes in first responders. I've worked full time for relatively large departments, about 1,400 to 1,600 career firefighters in Montgomery County, Maryland, and now Fairfax County, Virginia. And basically, what I'm here to do is teach you how to eat healthier for shift work when you don't have the time, energy, or money to do so. So with that, today we're actually going to talk about resilience. And if you looked at the flyer, we were actually supposed to talk about mobility and some like other fitness related stuff because I'm also a strength coach. But what I've found through your questions that Pearl had sent me through email, and also just I've now realized that I can actually talk about nutrition for 6+ hours. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is talk about a couple of the questions that I wanted to rehash, and then we're going to go into nutrition for resilience, just career resilience and recovery, nutrition for recovery if you're on light duty or you had some form of injury, and then we'll go into sleep strategies as well. So that is what today's 2.5 hours will be. All right, so to get started, I had a question about GMOs last time, and I just felt like I didn't answer it as well as I wanted to. And so GMOs are genetically modified foods that usually they're plant-based foods, and they basically alter the DNA through genes of like another organism. And there's a couple different ways you can categorize genetically modified foods. It could be specific plant breeding, but the newer model is kind of taking genes from other organisms to another one to improve the quality, reduce pesticide use, or increase farmer profit or farmer yield. So all of those things are kind of important, particularly with farmers struggling with all different types of crop issues and then population increase and all of that. Now, the challenge is there's a lot of people on the internet, and some of them seem really qualified, like MD behind their name and all of those kinds of things, that say that genetically modified foods could potentially cause health concerns. And really, there's not a whole lot out there in human randomized controlled trials to suggest that genetically modified foods would cause health concerns in any way, shape, or form. So, and if you want to read into some of these studies, I did link them all in the notes section. So when you get the PDF of these presentations later on, you're welcome to kind of flip through those. But the other concern with GMOs is even the label can be misleading. So the FDA launched an investigation, I believe last year actually, and found that 30,000 products with I don't have, the non-GMO label may be considered misleading, because the FDA considers GMOs not just that like DNA kind of crossbreeding situation, but also, just prolonged changes in plant breeding over the course of time. So there's a bunch of different things that they could consider genetically modified that some products may not have. So the reality is a lot of these non-GMO products, like they'll put that label on there, and a lot of people will just automatically kind of assume that they're better for their health. A lot of times this also allows them to kind of increase that price number. So, if you're kind of like, concerned about your health and kind of confused, then really I think you're probably okay to just go with GMO-based foods or non-GMO-based foods. But if you have a personal preference to go non-GMO, then I think that's also your right. But the reality is there's just no reason for me to really push non-GMO foods on my patients and on the firefighters I work with. And now that kind of segues right on into organic food. And I don't think I might have gotten a question on this. But organic food is a kind of another one of those things as well. And organic foods must meet certain USDA criteria to even be considered organic. So they can't have synthetic, and the key word here is synthetic pesticides, hormones, antibiotics, if it's like cow or chickens or animal based. They can't have GMOs, or they can't use ionizing radiation. They can still use natural pesticides. So what a lot of people assume is when they see this organic label, that it automatically means that these organic foods do not use pesticides at all. So with that, a lot of times the price also increases for organic food, and the price doesn't mean that the quality of the food is better. And there have been several meta-analyses and studies that have reviewed vitamin content in organic food, and it's no different than conventional. It's about the same of like conventional foods that are not organic. So they're not necessarily healthier per se. And also, the other concern or the other thought process was, oh, well, organic foods may lead to better health outcomes for people, like better blood pressure, better cholesterol, that kind of stuff. And it really made no difference in human health markers either. So, if you're concerned about pesticides, the residue is really kind of minor. You'd have to eat a lot of fruits and vegetables in order to get that pesticide residue high enough to see concerns for carcinogens. And usually that leads to too much like bloating and gas before people could even get to that point. Kind of gross, but kind of the reality. So, not too concerned with really pushing organic foods as well. Now, of course, if you choose to eat organic and you feel better feeding your family that way, that's absolutely okay. But it does create a price barrier for some of my first responders, particularly if they're going through, maybe they have a stay-at-home partner or they're going through a divorce and there's some financial challenges. A lot of times they won't start off with, well, you have to eat organic fruits and vegetables, because the reality is that puts a price barrier in the way. So again, if you choose to eat organic, I think it's fine. It just doesn't mean that it's necessarily a better product or healthier for you. It just means they didn't use like some of those synthetic pesticides, hormones, antibiotics. And if that's a priority for you, then that's fantastic. And again, there will be notes in the PDF if you're interested in learning more about this topic. Another thing that we had was cooking oils. And this is where, I've kind of avoided putting any cooking oil posts on the internet because people get really emotional about this topic. But the reality is, so cooking oils like seed oils, canola oil is really is fine. You go on the internet and write in canola oil, and the chances are someone's going to tell you 17 million times it's going to kill you. The reason that a lot of people tend to be concerned with canola oil is it's a genetically modified product of the rapeseed oil plant or the rapeseed plant. And rapeseed oil initially has too much of the uric acid. I can't pronounce it. Ursic acid, I think is what it goes, and glucinolates that would be too toxic in the amount of in the dose to use straight rapeseed oil. So what they did is they genetically modified it to eliminate some of those toxic products to create canola oil. And canola oil is actually pretty similar to olive oil. It has a similar amount of linoleic acid, alpha linoleic acid. It has similar benefits to extra virgin olive oil, but it's not quite the same. So we still prefer extra virgin olive oil for like oil choices. Now the challenge with that is you can see the smoke point here. And I'm sorry if, I will send this out to you so you have this in a larger print if you can't read. But the little temperature gauge to the right is showing the smoke point of different types of oils. And smoke point is basically the heat at which an oil will smoke. And if an oil is smoking, typically that means the oil is degrading or has reached a point where some of the nutrients are no longer at the highest value. They can get killed off by heat. Specifically, omega-3s tend to get killed off by heat pretty quickly, especially really high searing heat. And I know, at least for me, but also a lot of my first responders really like getting those nice grilled charred marks on their meats, right? So olive oil smoke point is actually pretty low. It's in that low to medium. Actually, it depends on how processed or refined the extra virgin olive oil is. Extra virgin is going to be lower heat. Regular olive oil is going to have a little bit higher of a smoke point. So typically what I recommend, if I was just going to summarize this, is canola oil is not bad. In fact, it's one of the oils that are recommended by the American Heart Association. However, if for whatever reason you still feel a little uneasy about canola oil, there are plenty of other oils that you can use. Typically, olive oil is one that I would recommend for more like dressings and like non-heat based cooking or lower heat cooking. And then if you really want to get a pretty sear on something, I would recommend avocado oil, which you can see to the right is at the very top with one of the highest heat smoke points. So, if you want to read more about cooking oil, there's some great articles by today's dietitian on that topic, kind of debunking some of the myths. And I believe the American Heart Association has a lot about that as well. So, questions on any of that?
Yeah, we've got a question about the omegas. So omega-6s versus omega-3s versus omega-9, and if you could speak to the inflammation response regarding those.
Yeah. So basically, it's how the chemical structure of the fat is: omega-6, omega-3, omega-9, and I can't remember off the top of my head exactly what those are, but basically. Typically, we want to see a higher ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s. So we're trying to get more of those omega-3 fatty acids because it's harder to get it through the diet. So typically we're talking, and I'm going to go on a full tangent about omega-3s later in this presentation. But basically, our diets, particularly the Western, like standard American diet, does not get a ton of omega-3s in the diet because typically they're coming from seafood or plant-based foods like chia seed, flaxseed, pumpkin seed, walnuts, those kinds of foods. So if you look at canola oil, it's got a lot more of omega-9s, but if you compare it again to the olive oil, it's similar ratio. Actually, olive oil has some more omega-9s. All of these are also anti-inflammatory. It's just sometimes they can come out of balance and cause, again, it can go inflammatory depending on how it is, but usually we're talking about trying to get more of those omega-3s. And I think we talked about this, Pearl. Do you remember what that ratio is?
I didn't, but I'll go ahead and look it up. And that was what from my understanding as well, is a lot of these foods have, all of these omegas naturally occurring, and a lot of them have them in the proper ratio and naturally occurring. Imagine that from real whole foods. But I can't remember what that ratio is, and that's kind of what I understood was the important thing, was just the ratios, which obviously tends to be with the 3s beating out the others, the 6s,
and striving to do it. You just have
and I'll
to
look
try.
up the ratio right now, actually.
Yeah, I think that's how we got stuck last time. I wish I'd have my act together by this point. But I think the other key point here too is actually really more the ratio of these omegas to saturated fat. So even the omega-9, so oleic acid, when they switch out from a higher saturated fat like butter or coconut oil to more of like an olive oil or canola oil, we see better health outcomes and better cardiac responses in the cardiac, like cholesterol panel and stuff like that. Because what saturated fat does, is specifically to cholesterol, is it actually raises your LDL or your bad cholesterol, but it also raises your HDL. So it raises both the good and the bad. So it's kind of like it's not great. We kind of want to reduce the amount that we're eating. But trans fat, which is, you don't really see a whole bunch of these here in the natural based seed oils. Trans fat is something that the World Health Organization is really trying to crack down on. Trans fat was like basically from, it was a human made fat that was basically created when margarine was created a long time ago. And I can't remember, I think it was a while ago. But margarine is high in trans fats, and what they are finding is that trans fats actually raise your bad cholesterol and lower your good cholesterol. So it does a double whammy on your cholesterol panel. And where you find trans fats is typically in any food that tastes delicious, unfortunately. So margarines, fried foods, Oreos have about 0.5 grams of trans fat, which doesn't sound like a lot, but I think all of us can probably admit to eating a sleeve of Oreos at some point in our lifetime. So if you have ever done that, you can see how the trans fats can add up really quickly. So those are the big ones to really try and cut. Like trans fats, we're trying to eliminate, avoid entirely. Saturated fats, we're trying to pull back on, but it doesn't mean you can never have butter again, kind of thing. Other questions? We're good. Okay.
Nope, nothing in the chat right now. I'm looking up the ratios thing, and it is all over the place.
Yeah,
so depending on your resource there, I mean, they're saying everything from, depending on a lot of people's ancestral foods, right? What their main diet's composed of, there's a little bit of a range there.
Yeah.
So like, and like evolutionarily speaking, like hunter gatherers versus people who are living in like coastal regions. So
Right.
it's a little bit less defined. Unfortunately, it looks like it's not like a total cut and dry thing there. But I'll keep looking.
Yeah, and that's the kind of the whole point of like a lot of people will argue that we need to go more ancestral with our diets, and when you talk about ancestral diets, they're all over the place, right? So more seafood based towns like the Japanese have great health outcomes, and then we can compare other blue zones that only ate corn. So yes, I think there's a good point, but also just holding every food to it is kind of not the best option. So yeah, so really the moral of the story is eat more omega-3s. And don't worry, I'm going to tell you how at some point in this presentation today. So
And
with that,
you may get to this when you go into that talk, but a question just popped up about what to eat to lower triglycerides.
I knew I should have put a whole slide on it. So what I will do is I'm going to talk about it shortly, but I will try and take a screenshot of my medical nutrition therapy textbook and put it in the Google Drive that I send. So you have, it has a really great like short thing on how to lower triglycerides, but I will get to that when I talk to omega-3s. But with that, I want to talk about resilience. And resilience, I think, is super important to first responders and even the people who support first responders, right? And the key here is that resilience is not just the ability to withstand like discomfort or like get comfortable with being uncomfortable kind of mindset, right? It is important to withstand. And I think as first responders, you guys have gotten like super good at the withstanding piece here, right? But where I see first responders struggle the most when it comes to resilience long term, so we're talking 10, 15, 20 years into career, that's where this stuff starts to crop up typically, is the not inability, but the struggle to really emphasize and allow themselves to recover. Because I think the culture, and I think we all know this, the culture has made it really hard to let yourself recover, right? To let yourself take a break. You're supposed to just suck it up, move forward, and deal with whether it's mental stress, physical stress, or all of these kinds of things. The problem is when we don't recover, this can lead to burnout. And I'm sure some of you have felt this burnout at some point in your career, whether it's mental or physical. So let's kind of talk about some of these like physical and mental stressors and some of the consequences that can come of them if you do not emphasize this recovery piece that we're going to talk about today. Well, first of all, firefighters, obviously you guys are exposed to smoke and pollutants, and we are seeing this in cancer rates in first responders, and they are raising at scary rates. We just did some ultrasounds over in Fairfax, and our numbers have jumped from like 27 to 80 members with cancer. Now, granted, we did do some additional screenings that pulled some of these up, but that's still scary, right? And where does this come from? Well, it typically comes from physical stress. So things like smoke and pollutants. The hard physical work is also a factor. So, you're raising your blood pressure, your heart rate is up, and consistently doing that in uncontrolled environments without warming up is a physical stress. Even when it is in a controlled environment, it's a physical stress. Heavy gear also is a physical stress, but with that, unstable environments, right? So you're wearing gear, especially a lot of times ill-fitting gear, and ill-fitting gear has more to do, at least with my female firefighters, right? When you go to, sometimes what'll happen is departments that haven't had a lot of females, then they have to deal with women. My friend Katie, when she started with Montgomery County, they actually created an extra small glove based off of her hand size because they never had a hand that small before. So, but the problem is it's like, okay, well, just wear the bigger gear. That can cause issues with performance and dexterity and ability to grip, specifically with gloves. With boots, if they don't fit appropriately, you're at higher risk to trip and fall. A lot of women will report feeling more clumsy than their male counterparts. And part of that is because a lot of times there isn't gears, available for women to that actually fits them. And that can lead to issues from slips, trips, falls, and other things like that. Now, men, I mean, it's the same thing, right? So, say you gain some weight or lose some weight. That can impact how your gear wears and lead to additional physical stress. The other thing here too is the high body temperature. And the body temperature thing is something that a lot of first responders overlook. But this high body temperature typically is, one, it leads to dehydration, and two, it leads to rerouting blood flow to the skin, which to help with cooling the body back down, right? Which leads to stress on the heart. And also that kind of hungover-ish feeling that you feel when you're exhausted after a hot call. Now, why is the stress on the heart a big issue? And we talked about this before. Well, 45% of line of duty deaths are caused by sudden cardiac death. And the reason for that is when your blood pressure increases, so does your heart rate. As your body temperature increases, the risk for you getting dehydrated also increases. This can lead to altered electrolytes, which can lead to a fatal arrhythmia. So that excess stress that keeps building on the heart. This is particularly a concern for our first responders who may not be in as good of a shape as they need to be. So one of the biggest things that can protect your heart against sudden cardiac death is getting in better shape and then also staying well hydrated as best you can. And I know it can be really challenging when you're on shift to remember to drink water and not to drink too much water so that you're not, holding it during calls and stuff like that. And it can be really challenging. So again, pay attention to that part. The other thing I want to notice too is a lot of these sudden cardiac deaths, the age range that we're seeing this at, I believe is around 40 to 45 years old. So 40 to 45 years old, depending on when you got into the service, is usually could be between 10, 15, maybe 20 years. So it's kind of a person where 45 doesn't seem it seems too young to have a heart attack, right? But because of all these additional physical stressors that we're putting our first responders through, and the tendency by that point in the career for shift work to start weighing on you and your fitness to start to slack. Now, that doesn't happen for all of my first responders, but sometimes that age range is where I start to see people really struggle from a fitness perspective. And part of that is because of the injuries, right? Usually by the time someone is in the drop, I've seen them have a shoulder, back, and or near neck injury. So they have between 1 or 3 of these big major injuries. And the challenge with that is if you blow your shoulder out and your favorite thing to do was Olympic lift, are you just going to start running to stay fit? You might. But if you really hate running, it's going to be hard to make that shift, right? Just to stay fit. So when you can't do what you used to enjoy and things start to hurt and you're having pain, it makes it a lot harder for you to stay fit. Obviously, the sleep deprivation also makes it challenging. So, I don't want to discount that the fitness kind of falling off over the course of the career. It's because things are really challenging, but it is super important to make sure that we're trying to get that cardiac fitness specifically back up when we can. And the recovery piece we're going to talk about is that targeted nutrition and then also exercise and sleep. Now, I'm not going to talk about exercise as much as I thought I was going to today, but what I want to leave you with for the exercise point is do what you like. I don't care what it is. If you like playing hockey, if you like playing pickleball, if you like walking, if you like running, just do something to keep you fit. It might not be perfect. And we know that higher intensity interval training, weightlifting is super important. Rotational training, mobility is all important for our first responders. However, our biggest thing is you making sure that you're doing some sort of activity. So if you're listening to this now and you're like, oh my gosh, I've let this fall off. Even if you just walk on the treadmill for 15 minutes today, that's something, right? So something is always going to be better than nothing for this exercise piece. And if that's where you have to start off, let's start off there. Now with that, I know I'm really starting off with some good news today, right? Another challenge for first responders is the mental stress, right? The traumatic calls, the high call load, or sometimes even the lower call load, overtime, trainings, sleep deprivation. Typically, if it's under 6 hours per day, that sleep deprivation starts to add up over time. And then also that suffer in silence mentality, and I think it's getting better, especially as departments start to hire more behavioral health providers. We're up to 5 in Fairfax. That tendency to kind of suck it up and tell no one is hopefully kind of shifting away. But there's huge consequences to that kind of suck it up mentality. And the reality is, especially when you add sleep deprivation, PTSD, depression, and all of those things into it, first responders are 5 times more likely to suffer from PTSD, 5 times more likely than the general population. We see more firefighters die by suicide in our line of duty deaths. And the concern too is that 37% of our first responders have contemplated suicide. That's a pretty high number. So the big thing here is, like, I can talk about nutrition and fitness and how important it is for your mental health, but counseling is probably needed for most first responders at some point in their career. So finding a provider that is a good provider can be really challenging, and I don't want to discount that. I can tell you from experience working with first responders in Fairfax is we have 5 behavioral providers on staff, which is huge, because I'm sure there are some stations or some units in California that don't have that luxury of having specialized providers on site. But there can be a barrier with that sometimes, because first responders think that might get back to their employment and pull them from the floor. And I can tell you, if there is a behavioral health provider within your county, I recommend going with them. If they're not the right fit for you, obviously that's understandable, but they're a really good starting point because they understand your job. Because the alternative is going to your buddies or who's not a first responders provider, and them not understanding the stress of your job and some of the things that you deal with. So again, you can go to whoever or use peer support providers and that kind of thing. But this is something that we really need to emphasize, is that mental health piece. Because if you're finding that you are really struggling with the nutrition or the fitness or the sleep part of this stuff, and you cannot stick to the mental, like the wellness piece, we might actually have to take care of your mental health first. So because yes, nutrition does impact your mental health. But if your mental health is, if you're kind of in a crisis, it's going to be really hard to make nutrition changes when you're going through something. So that is my tangent. But I really, if you have any trouble finding a provider, I'm happy to help if you shoot me an email to get you to the right source if I can. Now with that, of course, nutrition all impacts both that physical stress and that mental stress side of things. And these are some of the nutrients that I'm going to emphasize today. So we have omega-3s, antioxidants, vitamin D, magnesium, potassium, and fiber. Of course, fiber, because I am the fiber nag queen. Now, I just pulled a bunch of different nutrients out, right? Like extrapolated specific singular nutrients. But the reality is we do not eat singular nutrients, right? We eat food, and food comes with a variety of nutrients. Now, this is my magical pie in the sky, ideal fairy tale land that not everybody lives in, and sometimes I personally don't live in. But this is kind of what the foundation is, what we're striving to do. We're trying to, at minimum, get 2 to 2.5, if not 3 cups of fruits and veggies a day each. We're striving for 64 to 128 ounces of water a day. We're striving to include olive oil or nuts and seeds into our diet for the healthy fats. We're striving to get protein, at least 3 to 6 ounces per meal. Whole grains are important for fiber and B vitamins. And then seafood is important for the omega-3s. And then also I'm going to talk about astaxanthin, which is an additional, just a singular nutrient, but again, another bonus thing that comes with shrimp and salmon. But this is kind of what we're looking at. This is our ideal foundation, what we're striving for. So if you're looking at this and you're like, I don't know if I'm anywhere near this, that's okay. Pick one of these things. That would be the easiest thing for you to start with. So if it's easiest for you to just grab an apple today, or something like that, or get a little bit of an extra serving of veggies tonight at your station dinner, start there. That's a good place to start, right? Start with the easiest thing, and then we'll work up to some of the harder stuff. If you don't like vegetables, we'll get there. Maybe we'll try fruit instead. But this is kind of what we're looking at for an ideal foundation for a total overall diet or eating plan. Now with that, omega-3s. Let's talk about these guys. So omega-3 fatty acids are an essential polyunsaturated fat. And we're trying to get more unsaturated fats into first responders and really just in general population's diets, because these fats are better for cardiac outcomes and just general health. Now, the omega-3s, there are 3 types. We have ALA, EPA, and DHA. So please do not get me to actually, these are abbreviations. The words are long and hard to say. But the reason EPA and DHA are highlighted on the screen in front of you is because these are specifically the ones that we want to emphasize. EPA and DHA, they come from the animal-based versions of these foods, so or sources of omega-3s, whereas ALA comes from more of those plant-based. So ALA comes from things like chia seeds, flax seeds. It's sometimes omega-3 fortified eggs, soy, pumpkin seeds, the plant-based versions of omega-3s. The EPA and DHA come from salmon, mackerel, herring, tuna, shrimp, like the seafoods and stuff like that. One, they're harder to get because not everybody likes seafood, and some people are allergic to seafood, right? Or they don't eat it because of they're vegetarian or vegan or whatever. But EPA and DHA, specifically DHA, is a part of the membrane, cell membrane for most of the cells in your brain. So what we see in ADD, dyslexia, depression, concussions is the composition of DHA in the brain is reduced. So there's a deficiency of specifically usually DHA, and that deficiency can lead to a risk for, again, those mental health disorders or make the symptoms worse. So what happens when we get people to eat more of the omega-3s, we see potentially improved brain function. We might see a reduction in depressive symptoms. And the research is kind of spotty on this. Some say, there is an improvement. Others say there is no improvement. So more research is needed on the depressive side of things. Triglycerides can actually get reduced by 15 to 35%. So that's a significant number for triglycerides. And actually LDL is pretty responsive to omega-3s. It's a significant amount of omega-3s to do this, and I'll talk about sources in a second, but it can reduce triglycerides either from food or by supplement source. And then it's in general an anti-inflammatory. So I got a lot of questions about like what foods are anti-inflammatory and that kind of stuff. And let me tell you something, it is omega-3s. So with that, I want to see you get this from actual food. So where we would get this from food would be about 6 to 8 ounces of fatty fish per week. So that does not mean you have to get 2 servings of fish every single day. That might be, if you live on the coast and you have access to it, fantastic. But if not, then we're trying to go for at least 6 to 8 ounces twice a week. Now, these 2 pictures that you see on your screen are actually some recipes that I've developed. There's a sweet chili salmon, which is on the top right corner. And it is like my favorite way to eat salmon, especially if it's air fried. Especially for people who are like, salmon has kind of a fishy taste, between air frying or at least roasting on high in the oven and the sweet chili sauce, it really kind of cuts that fishy taste. So I highly recommend trying that. And then the bottom one is some chia seeds and in some oatmeal with some apples. So you can get these recipes there at Palm Beach Gardens Fire wellness.com. So I write the articles for Palm Beach Gardens. And there's also a longer, about 500 word, so not super long article on omega-3s if you want more detail about this kind of stuff. Now, the plant-based versions of omega-3s are things like walnuts, chia seeds, flax seeds, seaweed, eggs, and soy. You're going to have to eat a lot more of these in order to get to the quantity that you need for the omega-3s. But if you incorporate some of it in, daily, that could be something you can work with, like walnuts in salads, chia seeds in oatmeal. Chia seeds also do really well for overnight oats because chia seeds are hydrophilic, so they're water loving. And if you've ever put chia seeds into anything in a couple minutes, they will basically suck all the liquid out of whatever product that is. So it's good for overnight oats because if you add the liquid to it and sit it overnight, it kind of adds a better texture. It's not as watery. So that is a great place to add chia seeds is in your overnight oats. Flax seeds are great for smoothies, specifically like the powder version. And you can also do omega-3 fortified eggs. Granted, I'm pretty sure you'd have to sell your firstborn to get omega-3 fortified eggs at this stage in 2023, but they are a great way to get some omega-3s in. Now, I will talk about supplements, but I really need to clarify that the food source of omega-3s is going to be better than supplements. So 6 ounces of wild-caught salmon will have 1.8 grams of omega-3s. The typical American Heart recommendation is 1 gram of omega-3s per day. So it's already got double in 6 ounces. The other thing that that salmon specifically is high in is astaxanthin. So astaxanthin is kind of a hot topic right now. It's an antioxidant, and it helps reduce oxidative stress, LDL oxidation. So LDL oxidation, that's important because if LDL oxidizes, it can cause issues like cholesterol streaking in the arteries. So it reduces that, and it also reduces DNA damage. So this could be something for recovery. A lot of people are now looking into this specifically for recovery and cancer prevention because it's reducing DNA damage. So astaxanthin is actually that pink pigment that you see in seafood. So shrimp, lobster, and salmon are usually the big sources off the top of my head. This is also the reason that flamingos are pink, because they eat the shrimp and then they turn pink. Their feathers turn pink. So fun fact, you can tell it to your kids. But again, so, salmon, yes, it's high in omega-3s. It's a great source of omega-3s, but it's also high in protein, and it's also high in an antioxidant that specifically could potentially reduce cancer, reduce LDL damage to your arteries, and then reduce overall oxidative stress for recovery in general. So again, if we just do the omega-3, supplements, it's just coming with the omega-3s. It's not that it's bad that it's just coming with the omega-3s, but it's not coming with the astaxanthin or the protein or the other antioxidants that are found, again, in seafood and the vitamins and minerals found in seafood. So now, you can supplement with omega-3s. They are relatively safe. I would personally recommend working with your doctor or a dietitian to do so to determine the dose, especially if you have like certain conditions like health conditions. You cannot do omega-3s supplementation if you are on blood thinners. So things like warfarin or aspirin, because omega-3s actually naturally thin the blood. That's part of the benefit. Not a good thing if you're on a blood thinner. So do not do omega-3s if you're on a blood thinner. And typically they will have you stop omega-3s if you're like about 2 weeks before you're doing a surgery or some sort of operation. The quantity we're looking at is about 1 to 4 grams or 1,000 to 4,000 milligrams of EPA and DHA. And that is roughly 1 gram or 1,000 milligrams of omega-3s is one of those big honking fish oil pills. So if you've ever taken fish oil, the pills are huge. You can buy like the fish oil pearls, which are these like little baby versions of fish oil, but you have to take like 5 of them to get one of the big massive pills. Now, one of the big side effects, I guess, of omega-3s is the fish burps. So if you've ever taken a fish oil pill and then you burp later and you're like, why does this taste like fish? It's kind of gross. If you want to cut that out, what you would do is you would freeze the fish oil pills, or I can't freeze them because if I freeze them, I will forget they're in the freezer and then I will never take them. So my suggestion is to refrigerate your fish oil pills and put them next to your coffee creamer, because you probably won't forget your coffee creamer. So that way you don't forget the omega-3s. But refrigeration seems to prevent those fish burps. Some of them also have mint to kind of prevent that. But again, refrigeration's fine.
There's also,
yes,
if you're going for like the omega-3s, I think there's some like algae, some ones which don't have as much of that fishiness. And so some people might tolerate that a little bit better, I guess, if they're having some issues with the fish burps.
Yes, and that's a great point, because the algae is also the plant-based version of omega-3s. So if you're vegetarian or vegan, or you are allergic to fish or something like that, then we recommend the algae supplement to begin with, because that's where the fishies get omega-3 from, is because they eat the algae. So now this dose gets higher if you are trying to reduce, so there is some evidence to suggest that you can reduce muscle soreness with high doses of omega-3s, but I really, like, if you're doing it for muscle soreness, I also have questions about your workout program. I want to make sure that you're not overdoing it. Now, if you're a recruit or something like that, then I could understand. Like, you just don't have the choice. That's what you're doing. But for triglycerides, typically we recommend between 2 and 4 grams of fish oil a day. Again, 2 to 4 of those big honkin' fish oil pills. So usually 2 in the morning and 2 in the evening. And that may reduce triglycerides up to 15 to 35%. But you got to take 2 of those fish oil, 4 of those things a day. Other things that can impact triglycerides specifically, the bad news about triglycerides is that they are really responsive to cutting back on alcohol, and they also are really responsive to cutting back on sugar. So basically everything fun is if you cut back on those, it will probably impact your triglycerides. Cardio is also important. So about 2 to 3 30-minute sessions of cardiovascular exercise per week may also help impact cholesterol panels overall. So that includes increasing HDL, the good stuff, decreasing LDL, the bad stuff, and reducing triglycerides. Any questions on that topic at all?
Just one question going back to the omegas. Krill oil.
Yeah, so you can do krill oil. It's a little bit more expensive, sometimes indicated as a higher quality option. But I also don't want to discourage people if it's double the price. Just start with a basic fish oil and see if it makes any improvements and go from there. You do want to go with something that's third-party tested. So third-party tested means USP, Informed Choice, or NSF International, and it'll have a little label that'll say third-party tested. Okay, I assume there's not other questions.
Nope, good to go.
Cool. So like I said, omega-3s are fantastic. Now, antioxidants are another important thing to help with recovery and resilience and disease prevention in general. And antioxidants, like this, is like a wide variety of nutrients, and it can include things like vitamins A, C, and E. Also selenium, which is a mineral, curcumin, which is an antioxidant found in turmeric. I almost blanked on what it was called. Found in turmeric. Astaxanthin is another type of antioxidant. Like, there are so many different types of antioxidants. Guess where they come from? Food. Plants, a lot of plants. Seafood are high in antioxidants. So those kinds of things are what we're trying to emphasize. Now, why are antioxidants so important? Well, they're considered free radical fighters. And I really like this little graphic. It's kind of silly, but it gets the point. And what antioxidants do is, actually, let's start with free radicals. So free radicals are compounds that you're exposed to, things like pollutants, shift work, lack of sleep, high stress, even technically exercise also increases free radicals. Like, day-to-day life increases free radicals. Firefighting increases your free radical exposure significantly because of the exposure to pollutants. And now we found that PFAS is in gear, and they've actually even classified firefighting as cancer causing. So, you're really kind of up against these free radicals because of the duties of your job, even more so than the general population. But the reason free radicals are so damaging is because what they do is they steal electrons. So you can see that little guy trying to grab the electron from healthy atoms. So what that can do long term and in excess is cause damage to tissue. And that tissue could be your heart, that could be cancer causing, that could be your brain, causing things like dementia or Alzheimer's, all of those things, right? But what what antioxidants will do is they have an extra electron and they hand that off to the free radical, and they basically neutralize that free radical. So when we eat more antioxidants, and I need to make this very specifically from food, when we get more antioxidants from food, we are able to neutralize more of those free radicals and hopefully maintain healthier tissues and just general better health. So again, antioxidants, they can improve memory, they can improve recovery, they can prevent heart disease and cancer, which are two big concerns in the fire service. Now, the knee-jerk reaction is a lot of people want to supplement with antioxidants, and they've actually found that particularly athletes who supplement with antioxidants, there's impaired muscle recovery. basically because inflammation is kind of like you don't want too much inflammation, but with muscle growth and recovery, you need some inflammation. And then when you supplement with an antioxidant, specifically right after workouts, that might impact muscle recovery. So, yeah, they're just not recommending antioxidant supplementation currently. So that is why fruits and veggies are so important, because they'll help you get some of these antioxidants. Technically, no, is vitamin D? I don't think vitamin D is it might be an antioxidant. Vitamin E is definitely an antioxidant. But vitamin D, the reason I put vitamin D up here is because I think the number was like something crazy, like 70% of first responders are vitamin D deficient. And this is one of the biggest things that we see in Fairfax, because Fairfax is we're kind of north, but we're not that north. In California, I'm sure it's the same thing. Maybe Southern California has less of a vitamin D issue, but that Northern California group might have a little bit more of an issue. Now, vitamin D deficiency is a concern because it can impact your immunity, it can impact bone health, and it can impact inflammation. So if you're vitamin D deficient, there's a chance that you have a higher risk for inflammation. The important part of vitamin D, specifically with bone health, is it actually promotes calcium absorption in the gut. So if you're vitamin D deficient, it can impact the health of your bones. Now, typically, the recommendation from food is 400 to 800 international units per day. So that's like a good amount. You can get that from you'd need a mix of vitamin D fortified milk, trout, salmon, mushrooms that have been exposed to UV light actually are high in vitamin D. So notice that I'm mentioning foods that not a lot of people love to eat. Like I don't see people or firefighters typically wanting to down cod liver oil, sardines, and liver. That's typically not like the things that food choices that most Americans are choosing. So it can be hard to get vitamin D through food. And if you're deficient, we typically will recommend some sort of vitamin D supplementation. And that vitamin D supplementation needs to come from vitamin D3 because that's the activated form. D2 is not going to work. It'll work, but it won't work as well. And that's about 1,000 to 2,000 international units if you're deficient. So deficiency is usually defined as less than 30 nanomillimoles. I'm screwing my units up, but it's less than 30. So usually your doctor will say, hey, you're vitamin D deficient. You should probably take a vitamin D supplement. Typically that range is 1,000 to 2,000. And you want to take that with fat or with a meal. The reason we recommend taking vitamin D with a meal is because it's a fat-soluble vitamin, so therefore it's better absorbed when you have a meal that contains fat. So that is also just typically any multivitamin in general, because vitamins A, D, E, and K are fat-soluble, so therefore it helps to have them to be absorbed. Again, vitamin D, we typically want to see it through food, but the reality is most of my clients aren't really leaning towards these vitamin D related foods, which is why we've actually started fortifying milk. Pretty much any milk is now vitamin D fortified, and it includes plant milks. And then fortified cereal is another way that they've kind of snuck that in. I should also mention vitamin D is considered the sunshine vitamin. So you can get this from sun, but depending on where you live and depending on the color of your skin, that can impact your ability to absorb vitamin D from the sun. Usually it's about 15 minutes of sun exposure without sunscreen, but the challenge with that is, we don't want people to forget to wear sunscreen because of the cancer risk. So, yeah. Now, another mineral that's important for general recovery and health is magnesium. And magnesium can help potentially improve symptoms of depression. And it can also help with deep or less interrupted sleep. And typically this sleep improvement is in people who already have sleep problems. With first responders, I typically assume that there are sleep problems just because shift work really kind of messes with that. And so does the community and the lady in the ceiling, right, with that call frequency. So sometimes magnesium, we do actually recommend supplementing with. This is one of the few minerals that I actually recommend. Now, of course, we want to get this through food. Typically, the recommended daily allowance is 250 to 450 milligrams per day, which would mean like usually incorporating a lot of nuts and seeds. So pumpkin seeds are high in magnesium, almonds, cashews, peanuts. Soy milk is also high, beans. This doesn't help people who are allergic to nuts, but again, beans, soy milk if you can tolerate it. Some grains are high in magnesium. Again, we're trying to get this through food, but if you can't, then we want to go with potentially a supplement. So I think it's about 300, 320 milligrams to help improve sleep. You don't want to go too high with magnesium. So you do eat, number one, the pills for magnesium for 300 milligrams, again, are huge, chalky pills, and you have to take 2 of them, in my experience. Now, going too high, especially with mag citrate in the liquid form, can lead to diarrhea. It's actually used for reducing constipation after surgeries and stuff like that. So you definitely don't want to overdo it, but it can, again, help with sleep. All right, and our last mineral is potassium. So potassium you're probably familiar with because it's important for, it's a mineral often lost in sweat and an electrolyte, right? Also, you might be like, okay, well, potassium, bananas. Bananas are high in potassium. Well, if you look at my little list right here, bananas are like halfway down. Actually, the highest source of potassium is a white potato baked with skin. So the key word here is with skin. Potatoes with skin are actually highest in potassium. And I don't know why I don't have kiwi on here. 2 kiwi are actually high in potassium. So are plums and raisins and acorn squash. Those are actually higher in potassium than bananas. Spinach, orange juice, tomato juice, actually Raisin Bran is also high in potassium. And the reason that we're trying to get more potassium, and this is specifically through food, we do not supplement with potassium because there are negative effects with potassium, unless your doctor is telling you to supplement with potassium. But too much potassium from a supplement standpoint can cause heart issues. But potassium through food can actually help lower blood pressure. So a lot of times if people come to me and they're like, I have high blood pressure, high blood pressure is typically pretty responsive to increasing the potassium in the diet. So eating more fruits and vegetables is basically the moral of the story there, and reducing sodium. So we try to add more fruits and vegetables and edge out like some of the more processed foods to edge out some of the sodium there when people have high blood pressure. Now, there is the diet that is recommended for people with high blood pressure is called the DASH diet. Dietary approaches to stop hypertension. And basically that diet is kind of like a Mediterranean style diet where you're eating a lot more fruits and vegetables and trying to cook more at home when you can. That can again be a challenge for first responders, but keep in mind that frozen fruit and canned fruit are still perfectly fine. So, which is important to note because if you're held over again, you don't want all those fruits and veggies to go bad in your fridge. Let's stick with some frozen or canned and then rinse them. The key word is key there is rinsing your canned veggies to help reduce the sodium. Deficiencies for potassium, usually we see memory loss and confusion, and like that, you are really deficient in potassium at that point. That's not just like a mild thing. So again, dehydration could be part of that. So, but usually, bananas are not your only way. You can do this through potatoes, plums, raisins, kiwis. I do want to note, because I've mentioned bananas a couple times now, the internet seems to have a vendetta against bananas. I don't know why. I mean, I guess I know why. Basically, the internet says if you eat too many bananas, they're just too high in sugar and it'll cause you to like spontaneously gain belly fat or something. There is no evidence to support that. Bananas are a perfectly healthy food that's high in fiber, high in potassium, high in vitamin C, and a bunch of other nutrients. They're great for pre-workout or in the middle of, a run or biking and stuff like that. So yeah, bananas are great. No reason to cut back on fruit.
We've got a question about potassium.
Yeah.
Why is potassium differently allocated through food and supplements? And does this occur with other vitamins or minerals? Hmm.
What do you mean by, does allocated mean like the quantity? Because it's like a significant difference in
It
quantity.
could be, yeah, maybe why is that one such a significant difference?
Yeah, it's just so that's how most vitamins and minerals are. Like we need more of some and less of others. Potassium is one of those things. Um, Potassium can be lost pretty easily through sweat, so our losses tend to be a lot higher, especially in athletes. Also, keeping that number higher helps promote healthy blood pressure. And the problem is typically through diet, people do not, like most people get like 2,000 milligrams of potassium a day. So it can be hard to reach that number. But the problem is like that number is really freaking high. And if you're looking at the numbers to the right, you're probably like, that's going to be kind of hard to reach. Um, Supplementation, though, again, it's kind of like calcium, potassium and calcium. You do not want to supplement with because they can mess with muscle and nerve function. So again, it's cardiac function and nerve function that potassium works with, which is probably why the number is much higher. Um, Hopefully that answered the question.
I think so.
Okay, if it didn't, we can always follow up. I'm happy to do that. Last thing I want to talk about is, of course, fiber because I'm the fiber queen. But we talked about fiber previously for just like general health purposes, and fiber is great for. I know we had questions about reducing triglycerides and cholesterol. Fiber will do that specifically from fruits, veggies, whole grains, things like oatmeal, lentils, I already talked about whole grains, brown rice, legumes, those kinds of foods can help lower cholesterol by binding to excess LDL and eliminating it through the stool. So basically you poop it out. So we typically want to get fiber through food, 25 grams per day for women, 30 to 38 grams per day for men. You can figure out how much you're getting by logging in MyFitnessPal. Typically, MyFitnessPal or other food logging apps will tell you how much fiber you're getting just by putting in the foods that you eat per day and the quantity. Not saying that's an easy thing to do when you work shift work, but it is a way to figure out where you're at. But fun fact for the recovery standpoint of this is a high fiber diet can actually promote brain regeneration. So typically, as we get older and as we're exposed to different things, our brains kind of call it, neurodegeneration is common. And that is part of the process. Like we see degeneration in the brain. And that is typically we also help regenerate it. It's when that balance gets overridden and we see too much neurodegeneration, which can lead to things like dementia and other brain issues. Now, what fiber can do is basically promote brain regeneration. Sorry, there's too much generation. It's too late in the day for me to be speaking. But high fiber diets actually prevent neurodegeneration by increasing butyrate in the colon. So what butyrate is basically the little bacterias in your colon. We've talked about probiotics helping our little bacterias, right? The bacteria in your colon consume fiber and break it down and help digest it a little bit. So I've mentioned before, like fiber is an indigestible form of carbohydrate, but it's mildly digested by the bacteria or fermented in the colon, and it can produce something called butyrate, which through the gut-brain axis can actually get up to your brain and alter gene expression to promote regeneration. So it's a super roundabout way about how fiber can impact your brain, but basically by the bacteria digestion in your gut, they can actually help with brain regeneration. So again, another reason for me to be a fiber nag. And also typically by eating more fruits, veggies, whole grains, beans, nuts, and seeds, you're going to see more antioxidants, which again helps with inflammation. Any other questions?
No, I'm just glad you're speaking to that point. And that it really is just one of the many short chain fatty acids that get produced, right? There's just so many that come with this whole fiber package, and they all are very anti-inflammatory and create a good healthy gut balance and fight bad bacteria and all these amazing things. So it's kind of just the tip of the iceberg with how incredible actually what fiber can do for you.
Absolutely. And it keeps you less hungry. And we all know a hangry firefighter is a very dangerous thing. So, okay. So I've been talking for an hour. I can't believe it. But